My name is Regina Mattsson, and I am the Secretary General of WFAD. WFAD, for those of you who may not know, is a membership organization made up of NGOs and individuals from across the globe. Our aim is to prevent drug use, increase access to treatment, and to promote recovery. And as of this year, as you may know already, we have chosen for our next 10 years to focus on two specific groups of people, and that's the rights of children and women within our field. And due to this, we have created a gender working group, which has organized this webinar with you all today. So on behalf of this working group, I'd like to welcome you here and just introduce by saying that globally, 1 in 3 women over the age of 15 have experienced physical and/or sexual abuse from an intimate partner. The problem of violence against women is so widespread, it's been classified as a global public health issue by the WHO. And as our world has significantly changed for the past 7 to 8 months, a shadow pandemic has grown. And this is the increase of violence against women with 30% globally. One group that is and has been particularly vulnerable to violence, not only by intimate partners, but by acquaintances, authority personnel, and professionals, are women living with addiction. Even so, when it comes to research and advocacy on the area, very little has been carried out, which is making this particularly important for us to highlight today. So today on Orange Day, which is the United Nations Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, we will spend our time to learn more about this subject and to hear about some great work that's been done in different parts of the world. So I want to begin by thanking you all for being here today. And it is with pleasure that I am handing over the microphone to Britt Fredenman from Women's Organizational Committee on Alcohol and Drug Issues to lead us through today's seminar.
Thank you. In this webinar for Orange Day, we have 4 speakers. Participants are welcome to send questions through the chat for the Q&A that we'll have after the last speaker of the day. It is time for the first presentation. The realities of violence against women and addiction amidst COVID-19 by Lotten Sunna, initiator of #WithoutSafetyNets in Sweden. Welcome, Lotten, and the floor is yours.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are welcome.
I will try to share my screen here and tell you a little bit about Utanskyddsnät. Yes. Just like to comment on what you said today, as main news in one of our national newspapers, different regions in Sweden report that in the pandemic also abuse of alcohol and drugs have increased, and we know that with that also comes more violence and sexual abuse with more drug and alcohol abuse. And as you pointed out, in the rhetoric of violence against women in Sweden, many projects are defined as the work against what's called violence and intimate relationships, but it's very, very much the experience of our group that, yes, it could come from someone that you know and that you are close to, but it's a lot of the violence towards this group is not a partner or somebody of your family, but other people in society. Little bit of the background is that for our international participants in late October and early November 2017, the actresses in Sweden sparked a Me Too wave by doing an appeal, a manifest that was published early November, and that inspired many other groups of women in the society, mostly initially by different professional groups, to also make manifests and form appeals. And there was a couple of us that have background in drug addiction and other vulnerabilities that said, well, how about us? We who know everything about sexual abuse and violence, isn't there a space for us? And on November 22nd, 2017, we formed the group Utan Skyddsnät, which in English is Without Safety Net. We wrote a manifest that was published basically in all Swedish newspapers on December 10th of 2017. It got a very strong response, and there's a news agency called TT, which I guess is the equivalent of like a Reuters or an AP or something like that internationally, but for the Swedish community, and they published our appeal, which meant that all newspapers ran it. So we had 10 million readings in a country of 10 million people within a couple of weeks of articles that was how our manifesto wrote about us. So, but also it was a lot of, around that was a lot of, just briefly want to say, a lot of the stereotypes that members of our group said, you know, like, why are they using pictures of high-heeled women in rain, or blonde women in leopard coats, or, you know, this stereotype of like a prostitute in the street? That's not us. And then a member, for other reasons, posted this painting she had done of herself, and everybody says, well, that's what we look like. We don't wear leopard fur or high heels or walk the rainy streets with a swinging handbag. And that became our signature picture, because it expressed what the group felt like. And in just like a week or two, 535 girls, women and trans persons joined the group with experience of drug problems, trading sex, mental illness, homelessness, and criminal lifestyle, because we say those vulnerabilities often coexist. Very few only have one of those problems. Most people have experience of at least a couple of them. And there was an administration group of 8 persons from different parts of Sweden that started this work. We were united in having experienced or were experienced as sexual and structural violence. Party politics, religion, treatment methods, and other things that usually cause division between these groups have no space here. We decided very early on that we will not discuss the Swedish law on prostitution, or if 12-step is a better treatment method than drug replacement, or all that is insignificant in the group. We also have people both still using or selling sex, and people that have left it a long time ago, people that have walked different paths. So the thing that unites us is the experience of the sexual violence in this context. We are part of a bigger network work of other Me Too appeals that are based on other grounds, and also in this network of KSAN, where I, since a couple of months back, also is the vice chairperson, which is also a great network for Utan Skyddsnät to also lift our perspectives and issues. The stories that came initially in the Me Too movement was 97 stories of sexual abuse, and the stories was just written in a sort of flow that came naturally and had no specific format of how context should be structured. It was just what people wanted to tell each other in this closed forum. This is a secret, very sort of high, you know, deepest level of hiding on it's a Facebook group, and you can't find it if you search for it. You have to be invited and then accept back to come into the group, to create as safe of a space as possible on the internet. Some are just a few sentences, and some are long and detailed descriptions. And one of the just looking at the stories without and as I said, they weren't formatted in any special way. We didn't ask people to say special things, but we just looked at what age people said that these things had happened, and just spontaneously 29% of the stories was about sexual abuse before the age of 12. Another 30% was in the age of 12 to 15, and yet another 18% between 15 and 18. So that means that 77% spontaneously talked about sexual abuse as minors. And we can suspect that these figures would have been even higher if you had specifically asked when was the first time something happened to you. And this leads to the conclusion also that it's very, very important to find these children, primarily if they're at risk for sexual abuse, or if they have been subject to it, because many have also expressed that they feel that that is the root of later all sorts of vulnerabilities and problems that come later in life from these early assaults. 61% say that they've been raped 1 or more times. 71% says that there was violence during that rape. Many says that they have had lives threatened in connection to the assault, and all members of the group have experienced the sexual violence. There is not one woman that has lived in this world that doesn't have any experience of this. 25% say they were drugs against their will or without their knowledge, and you can think that it's not that strange if an addict is, has drug in the system during sexual abuse, but this is actually, for example, you believe that you take one drug and you take some knockout drug, or you've been fed drugs that you have not accepted taking and been put in a circumstance where you can be abused. And obviously many women have the experience of being incapacitated to various degrees to having taken drugs of any form has also made them vulnerable to sexual assault. Many say that they don't report sexual abuse since they know the process in court. We have some terrible examples of that women that are addicts are not believed. And they are often, you know, they describe it as a secondary trauma to have to go through a court system where you're very stigmatized and not believed. And the Swedish agency that investigates into crime, BRÅ, made a report about rape in Sweden that was published in early 2020. And one of the conclusions of that was that more than half of reported rapes in Sweden are vulnerable groups, women, and as that they define, for example, prostitutes, women with drug addiction problem, migrant women, and it's very, very high level of rape in this group. In the group, Utan is also several descriptions of not getting help from police, social services, healthcare, treatment centers, etc. on sexual assault. And another report by the social authority, Socialstyrelsen, I'm not sure what they call it in English, reported that also a majority of women that died as a result of violence was also either addicts themselves or were killed by men that was addicts. Also very sadly, most of them had been in contact with social services, and almost all of them just before they were killed. We try to talk about in the group, when we lift our perspective, about the structural violence against this group, and with that we mean the society accept the violence against this group. Is such things happen to such people, such women, and it's a method of sort of allowing the violence and sexual abuse to go on in a certain corner of society, so that you don't have to, you know, like really deal with it. It's something we did it to ourselves kind of thing. And we see that over and over again in different trials and so on, that women like us can just expect this kind.
2 minutes left.
How much?
2 minutes left.
Yes, I think I can go through it. What we've also done is identified needs in different groups, you know, children that are at risk of sexual abuse or victims of it, girls and women and trans persons that are living in addiction or prostitution now, and girls, women and trans persons that have left it, you know, different needs in those areas. We put together like 12 pages of the writings about it that has been handed over to various ministers and authorities and so on to work on with. We want to see a national plan of action, and we're working on Socialstyrelsen and Jämställdhetsmyndigheten, which are key authorities in Sweden for that, and we have regular meetings with them. We want to see resources for implementation of that, and some has come forward, but there's also a risk that when they put some money forward that it stops with that. We have to keep the pressure on to keep it happening. We formalized ourselves to be an organization in 2018, and we started getting some financing from state contributions in 2020. We are active in society panels, debates, etc. We work in social and traditional media, and we keep the pressure on politicians and authorities. and continued support for our members and peers. Now in COVID, we got like quite a big grant, about $60,000, to put together care packages for women that live in homelessness during COVID. That includes everything from personal protection to various hygiene products to tickets to swimming halls, etc., possibility to wash and stay clean and stay safe. This is a picture of us standing in Medborgarplatsen and handing them out just last Sunday, which was the 3rd anniversary of our organization. And with that, I'm done, possibly within my time.
Very much within your time. Thank you so much, Lotten. And now for the next presentation. The impact of drug addiction and on violence against women by Antonio Molina Fernández from the Universidad Complutense de Madrid in Spain. Welcome, Antonio, and the floor is yours.
A lot of thanks. Thank you, Mrs. Chairman. Thank you. Thanks to all of you. I would like to I really appreciate the invitation from the World Federation Against Drugs, and being honest, when I have seen the list of persons that are here today, for me also it's a pleasure, because I know that are here, there is a group of wonderful professionals and persons here. So I really appreciate the opportunity to present a part of the research that we're developing, especially talking about recovery-oriented programs, but not exclusively about recovery-oriented programs. And in this case, talking about women and about gender violence and about the other factors that are involved in the increasing of risk to suffering gender by disgrace, suffering violence by disgrace in a group of women with addictive behaviors. So when we talk about gender violence and about gender violence as a public health problem, as it was wonderfully expressed by Regina Madsen in the beginning of this session, we have to understand that this public health problem, as another public health problems, doesn't affect in the same level and in the same way to other people. When we consider women or violence, gender violence, as an homogeneous structure, as an homogeneous construct, we are making different mistakes, and most of those mistakes can be really complicated when we are trying to give responses to the people that are suffering this kind of problems. Making the analysis, because now what we are doing is more research than intervention. Making the analysis, we use the concept of intersectionality. So we're not only talking about gender, not only talking about gender violence, we're trying to identify which kind of factors are involved in the increasing of risk of women, in this case in women with addictive behaviors, women's under treatment of addictive behaviors, that to increase the risk to suffer violence, and what types of violence can they suffer, and what kind of severity they can suffer, trying to avoid and trying to give these responses that I told before to these women. We use a perspective of syndemic perspective. Syndemic, it was a concept that started in the decade of the 90s. It was originally developed by a medical anthropologist called Meryl Singer in the US, that told about a group of diseases and disorders in a specific population by biological and social interactions that increase the severity of the disease. So when we are talking about syndemia, when we're talking about syndemic problems, we have to understand that even if we have detected, as for example, WHO has detected the general problem of gender violence, there are specific social, biological, economical factors that can increase the severity of the problem and can increase the risk to suffer the problem. So syndemias normally are developing in inequality in places with inequality in health and access to resources, and are studied to identify different public health problems in communities and with any kind of anthropological and sociological aspects that can increase this risk of problems. topics usually analyzed in systemic perspective has been the poverty as a social problem, the addictive behaviors, and the structural violence. And gender violence is a structural violence. Gender violence, as Regina Matheson said, is a global problem that is included into our social structure, so it needs a common change, a global change, and a global intervention in the structure, not only with the person that are suffering. So it could be, it would be better if the policies and the design of the interventions in violence and violence against women that have an addictive behavior use not only the part of the decreasing of the aftermaths and the consequences of the problem, trying to identify and correct the previous causes that creates the problem. For example, talking about syndemic, the interaction between the disorders and the social factors are the core concept. So more than to talk about the specific factors that we can identify, we have to understand that we are going to find a problem that is not a linear problem. It's not linear. It has got ups and downs. So it's going to, the evolution is not going to be linear, and it's multifactorial. It's not only with one origin, but the combination of several factors can increase the representation and the relevance of the problem. About with talking about the intersectionality in women that are with addictive behaviors, first we have to identify several aspects. For example, women in treatment, in recovery treatment, are, depending on the place, are between the 10% or the 20% of the total users. Maybe there is one place that has got more, but I haven't found any kind of data with a similar average of men and women in recovery treatments. So the average is unbalanced, and it could be a problem for women that is for time into a treatment. The women in recovery, and a big average, depending on the studies, for example, the study of Gisela Hansen said that 90% has suffered gender violence. And it's true that most of them have suffered different kind of violence. But when we have analyzed gender violence in recovery-oriented programs, in women that are in treatment recovery-oriented programs, we have identified several aspects of violence, several levels of violence. We have been analyzing emotional violence, we have analyzing physical violence, we are analyzing also sexual violence, as Lotte said before. These categories are not excluded. So by this grace, it's possible to have suffered the three categories of violence. That can be a very unpleasant situation for sure. So the sample is, it was about 350 women in treatment, in recovery treatment. We made an analysis with different statistics, with looking for the combination and the covariance in different factors. We used the dependent variables, the gender and the suffered violence, and the suffered violence lifespan use, not only in the moment of the treatment. Factors that we combined were the family support, the social support, the employment, economical factors, the leisure time, and we analyzed how they affected and how what was the main relevance of this problem. It was a strong relation between to having addiction and the different kind of violence suffered. Have suffered emotional abuse. We made a comparison between men and women, talking about these types of violence. About emotional abuse, the 39.5% of men reported that they have suffered, and the women was this 58.1% of women, that there was a significant difference between them. About physical abuse, about physical abuse considered to have suffered, to have received physical damage. The average of women that suffered it was 46.6% of women, and only 20% of men reported that have suffered. And about the last variable, that it was the sexual abuse, that women that have, the person that has forced to have sex, the 2.7% of men in recovery treatment declares to have endured it, and the 23.3% of women indicated they have suffered sexual abuse in the case of women in recovery. these data are similar with data straight off all the studies as the research of Pérez del Río, Lara and González, or the research of Redonda Santos, or the research of Patricia Martinez. So we are talking about a problem that these data these are Russian data. These data are from the research that we are developing in the last 2 years. This shows us that is a problem that is sustained in time. So it's a problem, this is a structural problem. It's a problem that is integrated into our social structures. So it needs more deep responses by our side. And also it's connected with other big problems for women in treatment. We know that women in treatment has got the problem of stigma, but in the case of women in treatment that has suffered gender violence, they have a double stigma, double victim condition that can create a double stigma condition. And it's another problem that with the stigma in the case of gender violence women, the stigma, as we know, is not created by one origin, has got several stakeholders. So if we want to erase, to delete the stigma, we have also to identify the different stakeholders that are involved. Family is involved in the development of stigma, social structures involved in the development of stigma, professionals, and the way the professionals give the attention for the people, for the women in this case, also increase the level of stigma. Mass media and social media also increase the level of stigma. So if we want to decrease the level of stigma, we need to work in all those levels, trying to achieve a better position for the women that suffer gender violence and also have alternative behaviors. Because there is another extreme evolution of the stigma. There is a self-stigma that also is connected with a higher average of relapses of dropouts. Is this consideration of this double victim condition that makes some women to think that maybe they have done something to deserve this treatment, and it needs to be really carefully attended and really carefully treated into the programs, because we have to accept that in our self-critical condition, maybe the way this kind of trauma and this kind of problems are being treated into the programs maybe are not exactly the proper way to treat these situations. And there is an extreme expression of stigma that needs to be identified and needs to be worked as soon as possible. That is considered the self-dehumanization. In some cases, we can find that for the suffered situations, the people, the women in these cases, think that they don't have several human conditions in herself, in themselves, as for example, some emotions, some some rights, some values, some principles. So it's necessary to identify these topics when we are treating these women, because it can be a very big problem for the evolution of the treatment. Tell me?
About 2 minutes left.
Oh, don't worry, I have enough time. Oh, thanks. So we know that there are some specific interventions that are developing. For example, here in Madrid, there is a protocol of intervention in the treatment to detect gender violence and to make the right derivation for the women. So in any case of women, they are detected if they are suffering gender violence or not. I know also that Dianova NGO is doing a specific job in intervention in gender violence with women in recovery programs in the Sena and Camp Arellano. So there are a lot of interventions that now are going on and are working in different ways, trying to achieve the best results possible for women that are suffering gender violence. As I told before, the results of our study are consistent with results of other studies. Not only with recovery programs, also with other addictive behaviors programs. So this gap that are suffering the women in treatment needs more and better assessment, better treatment, better perspective for social integration. The professionals must receive a specific training about gender differences and topics. It's fundamental to avoid this stigma and the maintenance of this stigma. Topics like trauma, topics like sexual abuse, topics like violence, suffered violence, need a specific intervention in safe environments. Not all the environments in treatment are safe environments. So it's necessary to establish these safe environments. And Another thing that we have to understand is that these women in treatment are functional normally, demanding proper treatment for the needed situation. So we have to understand their diversity, we have to understand the different situations, we have to understand the situation that they are suffering. We need to review the design of our intervention programs, of recovery intervention programs, of all addictive behavior treatments, but in this case, recovery intervention programs. And we have to find also the other psychosocial factors that increase, as I said before, with this intersectionality perspective, the risk of suffering violence. Employment, housing, social support, family support, all these factors and role and play, all these factors and topics plays a significant role in recovery process and need to be integrated if we want to give the proper attendance to women that has gotten addictive behavior and also has suffered gender violence. So that's all. A lot of thanks. If you have any kind of doubt or question or comment, do not hesitate to make it.
Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you very much.
The next presentation, Violence Against Women, SUDs, which is substance use disorders, and response approach by law enforcement, by Chris Ibe, African Youth Initiative on Crime Prevention from Nigeria. Welcome, Chris. The floor is yours. Unmute, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
And I can hear you. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really sorry I came a bit late because I've been involved in my my university program, so I'm just coming. Please, can I have a share, please?
Yes, you're able to share your screen in the bottom of the Zoom box. It's a green button. Yes, perfect.
Okay. Oh. Okay. So I think
you can also make it a full screen by pressing the button in the bottom right corner next to the zooming options there.
Okay, I think I'm okay by this.
Okay.
Anyway, we are looking at violence against women and response approach by law enforcement agencies. So I captured it in few slides. We're looking at understanding violence against women, types of violence against women, effect of violence against women, the role of law enforcement in addressing violence against women, different approaches adopted by law enforcement agencies in responding to violence against women, challenges faced by law enforcement in responding to violence against women. We also talk about the way forward in responding to violence against women. So we are all aware about the declaration, the 1993 Declaration of elimination of violence against women, and that's exactly why we are all here. We are all here today. This position made us to understand that violence against women is a global issue. It's a pandemic. It's a pandemic proportion because it cuts across everywhere. It cuts both. It can come like result in physical, sexual, psychological. So it's a global problem. And that is very, very important that we understand the endemic nature, especially in this part of the world, in Africa, is something that that has been of immense challenge, because we know the brunt, most women go through psychologically, sexually, physically, even economically. We're talking about types of violence here. Gender-based violence is enacted under many different manifestations. From its most widespread form, intimate partners violence, to acts of violence carried out in online space. So it's not just only physical, there are also online aspects of it. These different forms are not mutually exclusive, and multiple incidences of violence can happen anywhere. This means while women face violence and discrimination-based gender, some women experience multiple interlocking forms. So one woman can experience sexual violence, physical violence, psychological violence, can also experience economic violence. So it's not just a single thing. In Africa, where poverty is something, where the human right is another problem, respect for women is a problem. So you see, one woman can actually face these multiple problems. Effects of violence against women. In most cases, some women don't come out. They don't come out from the violence meted out to them. Some might be physical, some might be psychological, but the most important thing here is what is actually the after effect of this violence. You see, most women are rendered homeless. They are rendered homeless. And their children too are also affected. Their children are also affected when this violence against women occur. Women don't bear the brunt alone. So we say violence against women can cause long-term physical, mental health problems. And this does not affect just the woman. Involve also children, families, even community. The community will live, because women play cardinal roles in the peace and economic development of the home. So when violence is meted out to a woman, there will be multiple effects that is associated with it. The question now is the role of law enforcement agencies in addressing violence against women. We are all aware that the law enforcement agencies are the first line response. The first line response. So we said globally, enforcement officers are the first actors who a victim of domestic violence is likely to encounter. Law enforcement is a well-known and highly visible community authority, provides free services. This position is basically in the Western nation, because in this side of the world, at times you don't even have law enforcement agencies. So you imagine what a woman will do, because we are talking about here the role of law enforcement agencies in addressing violence against women. So what happens to a community where there is no law enforcement agencies? But that is by the way. So we are talking about here, they are the first response. They maintain the peace. They secure the woman. They also make arrests, press charges for the culprits. Law enforcement, they play a crucial role in addressing and decreasing incidences. Intimate partner, they are also gatekeepers. So when issues like this happen, they intervene. But some of the challenges we have in Africa is that most women don't even call law enforcement agencies. Most women don't even call because of the cultural issue. So when you don't give law enforcement agencies information about violence meted at you, definitely they will not respond. So it's another challenge here. Then we talk about law enforcement approach in responding to violence. Establishment of helplines, funding shelters and other safe accommodation for survivors, establishment of access to service, limiting risk factors associated with violence, modification of family laws. You know, most of my references, I'm referring to Africa because I'm speaking from Africa, I'm speaking from Nigeria. The laws here are not favorable, especially to women. So when you talk about modification of laws, it's something we must project, it's something we must advocate for. Because if a woman is hurt, violence is meted against a woman, it's expected that the woman should invite the law enforcement agencies. But is it accepted in the African setting? The answer is maybe 20%. So, but what we have listed here are those approaches. And the last one is arresting and prosecuting. Some of the challenges we face, some of the challenges law enforcement face in responding to violence. Discriminatory social cultural norms and gender stereotypes. Law enforcement agencies find it extremely difficult to come to an African family setting to arrest the man. It's a problem. It's a very big problem. Dominance of informal justice system and customary laws. Poor communication, collaboration between security actors, even the victims themselves. The communication is not accurate. Most law enforcement officers don't get information. They don't get the information because it is only when they communicate to them before they can respond.
Excuse me, there is about 2 minutes left.
Okay, so changing priorities within broad mandate, short-term and fragmented investment. They don't invest in women. Most women here lack the economic power to sustain themselves after violence. So we talk about way forward here. Create, implement, and monitor a national action plan for violence prevention. Enhance capacity for collecting data on violence, because we don't have data here. You cannot count. We don't know how many women who are violated. We don't know. So define priorities for support, research, the cause consequences, cause prevention violence, promote primary prevention response, integrate violence prevention into our social and educational policies, promote and monitor adherence to international treaties. Especially in Africa, most of the government, they don't respect international treaties when they are signed. So there is need to monitor, especially the elimination of violence against women. There is need to monitor these international treaties because most countries, they have signed. So in conclusion, violence is not inevitable, but we can do much to address and prevent it. The individuals, families, and communities whose lives each year are shattered by it can be safeguarded. And the root causes of violence tackled to produce a healthy society for all. The world has not yet fully measured the size of this task and does not yet have all the tools to carry it out. But the global knowledge base is growing, and much useful experience has already been gained. Meanwhile, if we all work together, irrespective of your color, religion, we will win, and our women will be safe in our communities. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Chris, for this presentation. The next presentation is Gender and Drug Abuse Among Adolescent Girls and Young Women in Rural Areas of Uganda by Anna Nabulia Kavuma from Uganda Youth Development Link. Welcome, Anna, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Britt. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning and good evening. I hope I'm within all the zones. I will share with you as a practitioner who has been working with adolescent girls and young women in the rural areas, the experiences that we have seen with the young girls that we have served within our different safe spaces and drop-in centers in regards to gender, alcohol, and drug abuse. But I'll also bring in an aspect of the urban areas where we also operate, and then show you also what is being recorded generally in Uganda. So in regards to the rural areas, we've been implementing the DREAMS project, which is basically aimed at reducing HIV incidences among adolescent girls and young women that are aged between 10 to 24 years. And we were operating in 7 rural districts. And basically, we were looking at young adolescent girls within the ages of 10 to 24 years. So as we implemented from 2018 to date, 2020, we have reached out to 59,290 girls so far. And this graph here shows you the different districts and the different categories of young people that we have reached by age group. Now, this is a very interesting graph here because it shows you how many of the 59,290 girls that we served, how many of these were abusing drugs. And it's very interesting because we see 30,700 adolescent girls and young women who were abusing alcohol and drugs, and that is about 52% of all the young people that we have served. Now, I'll bring you a little bit into the urban setting where we work with girls that are trafficked and also those that are within the urban slum areas. And out of the 155 adolescent girls that had been trafficked from majorly Burundi and other countries around Uganda, we realized that we had a percentage of over 31% young people who were abusing alcohol. And then we had 26.3% who were using aviation fuel. So this problem is not just a rural area, but we are also seeing it among young girls and young women who have been trafficked within our urban programs. When we also look within the slum young people that we reach out to, we are seeing 56% of the female who are abusing alcohol, which is quite a big number. And then we are also seeing that we have 44% of males who are also abusing alcohol and drugs. So this is something that we are worried about as a country, but also as a practitioner. And these are the types of drugs that we are seeing them use. We see them using alcohol, we see them using marijuana, shisha, khat, and also cigarettes. And some of the reasons that they give why they're using or using alcohol and drugs is because they want to enhance feelings. Some of them want to build self-confidence. And then we've also seen a lot of increase in during the COVID-19 lockdown and pandemic, where people are increasingly abusing alcohol and drugs to deal with suppression of feelings, but also to deal with the other traumatic situations and depressions that they have gone into. Some of the influences that we are seeing within the adolescent girls and young women, we see many of them drinking as a result of their peers and their friends. Those that are in transactional sex and are in also multiple sexual relationships, they told us that many of these, it was their male sexual partners that were exposing them to alcohol and drugs. And then we also see the huge availability of alcohol and drugs in even the little shop that is in the slowest part of the village, being able to, you can easily find access to alcohol and drugs in those areas. And then we're also seeing some that are saying it's family members, and also the environments where they are. There are lots of slums, there are lots of bars, especially in the rural urban centers. You'll see a lot of young people in sex work, and then we're also seeing a lot of lodges and brothels in some of these areas, and these are all influencers and precursors for them to abuse alcohol and drugs. Now, when you look at the other effects that we have seen among the girls, the 59,000 girls that we served, we've seen that there's an increase in sexually transmitted diseases, which is at 62%. This is what this table here, if you look at the green bar there at the end, that's the total of how many presented sexually transmitted diseases, and it's also quite worrying. We were looking at how many of those had children or had gotten pregnant and had given birth, and we had 30% of all the young girls that we served who had children. When we looked at HIV, at how many of these were HIV positive, this was quite interesting because we had 0.29% that were tested and were found HIV positive among the 59,290, which is quite interesting, and it's something that we want to look into further because we are seeing more of sexually transmitted diseases. We are seeing more of cases of them giving birth, but there are reduced cases of HIV among this group of adolescent girls and young women within the ages of 10 to 24. Now, when we look at the gender-based violence cases that were reported amongst the 59,000, we are seeing 14% of cases that were reported that had been affected by different types of GBV, but all of these also had the aspect of sexual violence and sexual abuse as well. When you look at the recent Uganda report, Police Forces and Criminal Investigations Department report from January to June 2020, we are seeing cases of sexual gender-based violence increasing. In cases, 69,242 cases that have been reported to police in 2020, compared to 2019, where we saw 16,000 again cases being reported to police, which was an increase by 1.9%. But then we are seeing that the overall total of cases that are being reported to the police per month is on the average of 2,707 cases every month that are being reported for sexual gender-based violence. When I shift a little bit into domestic violence, we are seeing just by the end of June 2020, we see 8,000 cases being reported to police for just domestic violence. But then what is also interesting is that this is mainly because there's family disputes. We are seeing disputes over family property. We are seeing the issue of infidelity in the infidelity cases also coming up as one of the precursors. But we're also seeing drugs and substance abuse playing a very critical factor. What was interesting for us, I mean for me in the Uganda police reports, which is coinciding with my colleague in Nigeria, is that when you see the cases that are taken to court, out of the 16,000 in 2020 that have been reported, we've only seen 523 cases that have been taken to court. And of these, we've only secured 96 convictions, which means there's still a lot of work that we need to do. And I think as we looking at the theme, the Orange Day theme within the 16 days of activism, where we're looking at funding, preventing, responding, but also collecting issues that have to do with the gender-based violence. This is an area that we need to keenly look at and also respond to, as us having just 96 convictions out of the 16,000 reported is a very, very little number within the ocean. So globally, also as Uganda, we need to do something to look at gender-based violence. When you look at the other effects, we are seeing rape, we are seeing partner violence, we are seeing physical abuse, among others. When we look at what lessons we are learning from rehabilitating the adolescent girls and young people who have, and young women who have faced gender-based violence, we are seeing that the male sexual partner is the #1 perpetrator, and as such, we need to find these male sexual partners, but it's very difficult, especially in situations where they have multiple sexual partners. So it's also very difficult for us to rehabilitate an adolescent girl and young person where the abuse has been as a result of a family member. So you find that many of them prefer to settle the cases out of court and are not reported, or do a diversion where cases are settled amongst the families that are being affected. And then we're seeing a lot of corruption and bribery within the police, especially when it comes to prosecuting. And I think that's why we have only 96 cases that have been convicted. And then when you look at, of course, we have a lot of diversions and settlements of GBV cases at the local level, and so they don't get reported to police. So that means even with the 16,000 that we have, we still have quite a big number of cases that are not reported. When you look at our young people that we work with, you realize that we have, I think, around 2% that actually did report their cases to police. And then we have a lot of distortions in evidence to support investigations. And I think this is because sometimes the victims or the person that is reporting the case is also under the influence of alcohol and drugs. So some of the initiatives that we have undertaken as Uganda Youth Development Link in addressing gender-based violence among adolescent girls and young women, especially those that are affected by transactional sex, is that we've created safe spaces where girls can feel free and come and share their experiences, but also we help them build positive assets and also support them to identify other risks or risk factors that can put them at risk. And this can help in influencing their resilience. We have managed to engage the male sexual partners in many awareness sessions where we're using the SASA model to support in gender-based violence response, but also reporting of cases within the communities. We have mobilized many communities using the SASA model to create awareness among different communities, but also to deal with the social norms that are around gender-based violence and alcohol and drug abuse. We have created peer support networks within the different communities where we have girl engagement forums, where the adolescent girls and young women can come together, talk to each other, but also provide peer-to-peer counseling. We are also working with quite a number of stakeholders. We have established district GBV centers, and also we have built capacities of the key district personnel or local key stakeholders to be able to handle cases of GBV within their communities. And now we are trying to popularize these district action centers. And then we are also forming child protection committees within the different communities to be able to respond to issues of gender-based violence. We've also realized that socioeconomic, hello?
You have 2 minutes.
Yes, I should be done within the 2 minutes, thank you. Socioeconomic strengthening is one of the key components that we think can also support with gender-based violence or address gender-based violence, as we also include post-violence care. We've used the stepping stones model that is looking at HIV and GBV. We are also looking at expanded contraceptive mix, where we have both the male partners and also the adolescent girls being part of the system. So this is one of these pictures here show you some of the activities we are doing around HIV screening and testing. And as we are doing the HIV screening and testing, we are also doing the audit tests to assess the alcohol use. We are using stepping stones and some of the methodologies. This is the socioeconomic strengthening. some of the socioeconomic strengthening initiatives that we have done with adolescent girls and young women that have really worked for us and have supported in the change in behavior. And then we've also tried to do food distribution within the COVID-19 situation, where we see a lot of families fighting and because they can't provide food or they can't provide the basic necessities for their families. And this has supported in reduction of gender-based violence within the different communities, both within the urban and the rural settings. And then, of course, at the end of the day, we have this very big graduation where we have champions who are addressing gender-based violence within the different communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you all speakers for interesting and very important presentations. It is time for Q&A. I can see that we have one question that comes from Gladys, so I will read it right here. Just going to find it. How do we address the CRC towards the evidence-based family issue of drug use and domestic violence in relation to psychosocial and cognitive development? And Gladys also says there is statistics on this. So Gladys, who is this question for? Was it maybe for Chris or for Anna, Antonio or Lotten? Gladys, are you there? Well, let's see. Chris, what do you have to say on this question?
The question came after
Hello?
Antonio, so perhaps it was...
Was it after Antonio's? Okay, I'm sorry. Antonio?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I will repeat.
Hello, can you hear me?
How do we address the CRC towards the evidence-based family
Gladys.
of drug use and domestic violence in relation to psychosocial and cognitive development? The question was from Gladys.
Yeah, well, I suppose that it is in reference, and when I said that trauma is not is assessed, and when I said that family structure and family support also is connected with the increase of risk of have suffered gender violence. It's true that there are topics very, very difficult to treat when we are talking about gender violence. We are talking about violence against women and violence against women that are under addictive behavior treatments. For example, talking about as evidence-based practice for family, for example, we normally recommend to use intervention more task-oriented and more focusing solutions than try to solve the previous situation and trying to make a previous analysis of the previous trauma, because it can, even if the objective is adequate, is proper, the proper objective, but in fact it can create a problem at maintenance in the problem. So we recommend, for example, Britt family therapy from Shapothnik and colleagues that is most task-oriented, and it's talking about right here, right now. So it's the analysis of the trauma, of the sexual aggression or the physical violence is done individually with the person, by the person for the person in treatment by a professional, a trained professional about it, and the family problem, family situation. Intervention is done focused on task-oriented and focused on solution, much more than to make a family analysis of the previous trauma, even if it has suffered, as I said before, that are not excluded categories by this grace, has suffered physical violence, sexual violence, and domestic violence. So we prefer to analyze the different aspects in different contexts. And I think that we consider very important, I consider it's very important, and it's one of the main conclusions that we are doing in any kind of paper and report that we are doing of research, is to suggest new design, of new styles of intervention. We think that even us that are totally committed with the topic and totally involved in the topic and totally we understand clearly the reasons of the topic, has got our biases, limitations, and heuristics and previous ideas. And for sure the treatment has got these limitations and these biases included into the treatment. So maybe we are thinking that we have to make some kind of intervention, for sure, if better is evidence-based, talking about psychosocial aspects, talking about emotional aspects, talking about cognitive aspects. Maybe it's necessary to make a new design, a redesign of the programs, not based on previous experience, trying to design the programs, making an assessment of the needs and the expectations and the specific situations of the women that we have got in treatment in that moment, right here and right now. I think it could be a very useful way to treat the program.
We have another question also. Let's see. It's from Carlton. Given the known relationship between substance misuse and gender-based violence, and especially against women, what advice can the panelists provide to those of us who focus primarily on primary prevention practices and spotlighting the connection of these co-occurring challenges? So this is for all of the speakers. So let's start with Lotten. What do you say? Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I don't know what to say. I think that's, I don't really know exactly how to answer.
Hello, Regina, are you there?
I can think about it and I will move on. What do you say, Chris?
Hello, Gladys speaking.
A moment, Gladys. A moment.
I think, Chris, we lost his connection, so perhaps Anna.
Then we will go to Anna.
If I can say one thing, and that's for people, I'm not sure what field you're working in, but one experience that many have is that people that work with addict women don't pick up on signals that there is violence in their lives, you know, whatever that might look like. And I guess it's hard to say why, and sometimes also if there's some sort of help offered, it's sometimes comes with conditions of that is hard to live up with, that it has to be seen those problems together, that violence and addiction very often coexists and both problems need to be addressed parallel for it to work. It's hard to get clean or move on in life if you live with violence. It's maybe hard to deal with the violence if you take away the drugs. They have to be addressed together.
Thank you, Lotten. What do you say, Anna? Anna from UYDEL, did you hear the question? Do you like to comment on the question, please? No. Let's see if there is something else here. There is another question. Or have there been any attempts by World Federation Against Drugs to work with stakeholders in chemical laboratory analysis?
Hello, Britt. This is Anna.
Yes, Anna.
Sorry,
I can hear you now. Yes.
So I'm now getting onto another one, but I would respond to Carlton in such a way that he needs to build his human capital to be more, to have adequate knowledge and skills to deal with the co-occurring incidences of alcohol, gender-based violence, and other issues, underlying factors. Because if you do not have the human capital that are aware and are competent enough to deal with these issues within your prevention program, it will be very difficult for you to address prevention, because now what we are seeing is that issues of gender-based violence, alcohol and drug abuse are increasing and we need to have a strong primary prevention program that actually starts before a young person hits adolescence, because then we will be able to deal with the prevention aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. We have another question. Is it really possible to reduce gender-based violence? If so, what is the single most important intervention that really helps? Finally, why are cases of gender-based violence taking long in courts? This is a question from Solomon. Let's see who can answer this one. Antonio, what do you have to say?
Well, I think it's a very good question. Yes, for sure. We think it's possible to reduce and decrease gender-based violence, and for sure. But I think that there is not a single intervention, and there is not a single factor that can be the key factor to decrease the gender violence. I think that we have to connect, interact, make interact several factors. We have to identify how is the influence of individual factors as emotional modulation, of impulsivity, of the tendency of aggressive behaviors, because when connecting these individual factors of behavior, the behavioral disorders, connecting with these individual factors with the microsocial factors, why we still live in social context which in specific places is accepted, some kind of violence from one figure to other figure, from one person to other person, from one gender to other gender, and they're accepted in this context. And then in macrosocial factors, why for example, is still in our Western civilization accepted this very aggressive, very impulsive stereotype of men with a lot of capacity, supposed to be a lot of capacities, a lot of abilities, a lot of skill, but in fact there is no connection between the impulsivity and the skills. But in our mind, we still have got this stereotyping of men that looks like a very aggressive, very tough, very hard, and supposed to be the proper way to do things. So I think that there is not one single factor. I think that we have to identify several factors and how they interact, because in different parts of the world, in different countries and different places and different cultures, because there are a lot of cultural factors, the influence of a lot of cultural factors in this topic, how interact in different cultures. So in that way, it would be possible, and I think it's absolutely possible to decrease the gender violence.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anna, what do you say about this? Finally, why are cases of gender-based violence taking long in courts?
Thank you, Britt. I think for me, why cases are delaying in court, it's because we do not have adequate evidence, which sometimes is already distorted by the fact that the victims or the people that are presenting the case, that are reporting these cases, are already under the influence of alcohol. So there's not enough evidence. Evidence is already distorted, and so the legal system may not be very supportive in terms of prosecutions. But I'm also looking at the fact that maybe sometimes we do not have the adequate manpower within our prosecution system to support dealing with cases of gender-based violence. But I think it's more of also the commitment to treat this issue as, to give this issue the due attention it deserves. Because if we were committed, then we would have quite a lot of prosecutions within court. We would have dedicated judges that would be, passing judgments earlier, but also the fact that we do not have equipped courts to deal with issues of gender-based violence. So I think we need to invest in building capacity for our prosecutors, but also for our judges to appreciate that issues of gender-based violence need to be dealt with frequently, and this should be taken faster and not delayed into the process, because as we continue to delay them, the evidence gets distorted or there's not enough evidence. And then also maybe have like prosecution-led investigations so that the prosecution can guide the investigating side on what kind of evidence they need for them to be able to have a winning case. So I think that's where we're at, and that's what we need to do. And of course, we need to also get government's commitment to be able to deal with issues of gender-based violence.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Lotten, what do you say? Is it really possible to reduce gender-based violence? And if so, what is the single most important intervention that really helps?
Yeah, I have to agree with some previous speakers. I don't think it's like one thing that will fix that problem. I do believe absolutely also that things can change. It's again, you know, some sort of, I think Antonio was speaking about the idea of, you know, how men should be, or what is, you know, kind of almost acceptable behavior within men. So I think it's on many levels. It's on, it's obviously on a sort of in the legal system of how, you know, courts deal with violence, and how evidence is judged and sentences, sentencing and trials and such. But I also think it's also in a sort of community that, you know, men, I think, unfortunately, I don't think, you know, like if women talk about it, it has a great effect. I think it has a greater effect on the men that speak to other men and don't accept the kind of speak or actions that encourage or accept that sort of aggressive, violent attitude. So, I mean, I think there's many things that need to happen, both legislative, in the public debate, and a person-to-person interaction. It needs to happen on all those levels at the same time. But absolutely, I think change is possible. I do not believe that, you know, like we're born this way and it has to be like this forever.
Thank you, Lotten. We have another question from Solomon. Have police been successfully sued for failure to investigate satisfactorily and for disappearance of evidence? What do you say, Antonio?
I think that when we include the security and the forces in the topic of gender violence, is because they have failed previously a lot of levels of intervention. So the problem of police now is that police maybe is not so well trained in several topics than we would like them to be trained about it. Police is not exactly well trained about addictive behaviors. Police is not exactly, and not even closer to be trained in gender perspective and gender topics. It's true that there are experiences of a specific training that I think they are the proper way to work, but normally are in the specific forces and services that are attending for women that we know there is a problem, but in the assessment and in the primary intervention, for sure, but not only in police, but for sure, is necessary much more training and specific information about how to do, about what to do, about why to do, about how to inform, about how to protect, about several topics that are absolutely necessary, and even to increase the, we are talking a lot about to decrease the gender violence, but also the positive perspective is we have to increase the secureness in our context, this perception of secureness, decrease the level of violence. If we have the idea that we are living in a secure context, it's possible to decrease this level of violence. So it would be better if the police, no, but not only the police, I think that all the legal structure need a specific training in gender violence and in gender perspective, not only talking about the violence, talking about gender perspective. And it's not new, because this that I'm talking, it's not exactly new, but I think it's still necessary.
Thank you, Antonio. Anna, do you have a comment on this?
Yes, it's very difficult to actually prosecute the police or sue the police for not providing enough evidence. because then again, you will need evidence, of course, to sue them. And I think it's not a practice that we have had in Africa, or I don't even think I've had that practice anywhere where a police officer has been sued for not providing enough evidence. Maybe this is something that we may need to explore, and hopefully it could also be one of the ways to support the quick dealing with cases or convictions within the courts. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. The questions that we didn't have the time to answer right now, you can send them all to Regina, who will get them answered and send the answers back to you. So I'm now going to give the microphone back to Regina. So it was so nice to meet you all. It was an honor to be a moderator of this webinar. The word is yours again, Regina.
Thank you, Britt. And it was our honor to have you moderate this webinar. And thank you again to all of our fantastic speakers and participants. We have arrived at the end of the sessions, and we're absolutely overwhelmed by all of the participation and all of your lively comments and questions. It shows that this topic is important for all of us, and we are well on our way to find mutual pathways to work against violence against women. And today marks the beginning of these 16 days of activism that lead to the Human Rights Day on the 10th of December. And today on Orange Day, the world will shine orange and bright orange all over the world, from the European Parliament to the middle of the World Monument in Ecuador, to the Abu Simbel temples in Egypt and the Monument Nasional in Indonesia, to the Indian Gate in New Delhi, to the UN building in Ethiopia, and the Fortress of Travnik in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Niagara Falls in Canada and US, and also Globen here in Sweden will be shining to highlight the fight against gender-based violence. So please join us in sharing your stories. Take photos of yourselves wearing orange, or if you see a building in your neighborhood, and tag us or send to us. And let's all remember that although the campaign comes to an end in 16 days, the work towards ending violence against women does not stop. So thank you again. And I look forward to seeing you all very soon.